James froze. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Anna. Cold and precise, I'll send details soon. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. No signature. No warmth. Just distance. The steam rising from his untouched coffee curled into the silence, pressing against his chest like a physical weight, making every breath feel optional. Somewhere in the house, a shadow shifted, just at the edge of his vision. The dinner table was set for 6, the roast cooling beneath its foil, steam fading into a silence so heavy it pressed against James Caldwell's chest, making breathing feel optional, and the microwave clock blinking just after 9 p.m. Well past bedtime. On the counter, beside a stack of unopened mail and a child's forgotten homework sheet, lay a handwritten note and a wedding ring placed with deliberate care, as if precision could soften betrayal. It wasn't simply the end of a marriage, it was the demolition of a life built on deferred dreams and quiet sacrifice, leaving James alone in a suburban Chicago house with 4 children asleep upstairs, unaware their mother had already chosen a world without them. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and finality, the kind of stillness that arrives before a lifetime of noise. And for a long moment James stood motionless, staring at the note as if it might rearrange itself into something survivable. Then came the sound that sealed it, the sharp, mechanical zip of a suitcase closing in the bedroom, louder in its finality than any shouted goodbye. James stepped into the doorway, tie loosened after a 10-hour lab shift, exhaustion hollowing his eyes, just in time to see Anna smooth the lapel of her beige trench coat, flawless even as she dismantled their shared existence. "You're not even going to wait until they wake up?" he asked, his voice stripped of anger by shock. Anna didn't turn. She checked her reflection instead, applying lipstick with steady hands. "If I wait, I'll never leave," she said calmly, "and if I stay, I'll disappear in this house." James took a step forward, the floor creaking beneath him. "We have 4 children," he said. "Liam is 10, the twins are barely 5. You're not suffocating, you're parenting." She turned then, eyes sharp with resentment. "I'm drowning in routines, packed lunches, your student loans, and a future that keeps shrinking," she snapped. "I married potential, James. I didn't sign up for mediocrity." The words landed with surgical precision. He flinched but held his ground. "We're building something," he said quietly. "It takes time." "I don't have time," she replied, gripping the handle of her designer carry-on. "Someone else is waiting." The implication settled between them like poison. James exhaled slowly. "So that's it?" he asked. "You're walking away?" "I'm choosing survival," she corrected, brushing past him. At the door, she paused just long enough to let hope rise, and die. "The kids are resilient," she said. "They'll adjust." She stepped into the freezing night without looking back, heels clicking down the porch as snow swept into the entryway. And James remained still long after the taillights vanished. The house stayed terrifyingly quiet until a small voice broke it. "Dad?" Liam stood at the upstairs railing in flannel pajamas, comic book clutched to his chest, eyes far too old for his face. James knelt, forcing calm into a shattered heart, and pulled his son close. "No," he whispered. "She's not coming back." James let the phone ring once, twice, before it slipped into voicemail, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any sound could have been. The recorded message was calm, precise, deliberate, an outline of instructions that left no room for interpretation. As if every word had been measured to remove hesitation from his mind, he closed his eyes, letting the weight of it press against his chest, making each breath feel deliberate, almost optional, and glanced at the clock, well past bedtime, with Liam and the twins already deep in sleep, cocooned in their blankets like fragile islands of calm. The contrast between the ordinary domestic quiet and the strange, sharp intrusion of this message left him unmoored, as if the ground beneath him had subtly shifted without warning. His thumb hovered over the phone screen as he read Anna's text again. "I'll send details soon. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." No signature, no warmth, just a sterile, precise instruction that carried the faint sting of indifference. He set the phone down carefully on the counter, resisting the impulse to reply or demand clarity, understanding that panic would only worsen what was already complicated. Taking a deep breath, he tried to center himself, focusing on the familiar rhythm of the house, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking wall clock, the muffled, even breathing of children asleep, and letting that fragile normalcy settle him. Moving toward the living room, The creak of the floorboards under his weight sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet house, and he paused in the doorway to allow a moment of private frustration to wash over him, to let the tension settle like sediment in water, leaving only a slow, deliberate focus behind. His mind raced, turning over every possibility, every detail Anna might have withheld, every implication behind her careful wording, and he fought the urge to act impulsively, to lash out at the emptiness of the message. There was a part of him that longed to scream, to make the air itself shudder with his anger, but that instinct faded quickly, replaced by the controlled, grinding patience of someone who had learned that in situations like these, restraint was often the only weapon that worked. He glanced toward the staircase, imagining Liam's soft breathing and the twins huddled together, the fragile piece of the house demanding protection. Whatever this message meant, it wasn't solely about him, it was about preserving stability for the children who relied on him, even if that meant waiting, even if it meant holding tension like a stone in his chest. Exhaling slowly, muscles taut but measured, he picked up the phone again, not to respond, not yet, but simply to feel its weight in his hand, a tangible reminder of the unknown that had been thrust into their lives. Outside, a faint wind rattled a loose shutter, carrying the indifferent echo of the city, but inside, the house remained quiet, steady, and James remained there, waiting, bracing, calculating, ready for what clarity might bring when it finally arrived. James moved cautiously through the dim hallway, each step deliberate, yet the weight of unease pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak beneath his own feet. He paused, listening. The ticking of the old clock on the wall was loud, exaggerated in the silence. Somewhere in the distance, a floorboard groaned, a sound he almost missed, almost dismissed. Then came it, a knock. Sharp, single, echoing. James froze mid-step. He wasn't expecting anyone tonight, or so he told himself. The knock came again, firmer this time, deliberate. He could feel his pulse quicken, a tremor threading through his fingers as they brushed the smooth banister. His mind raced. Who could it be? The neighborhood was quiet, the streets empty. No one would visit at this hour without a reason, and yet someone had arrived. He stepped back, blinking. Deep down, he knew this moment was inevitable. The rational part of him wanted to ignore it, to retreat to the safety of his study, but the other, louder part, he couldn't ignore it. He approached the door, hand trembling slightly, heart thundering in rhythm with the knocks. Another pause, then silence, just for a moment. James held his breath. He peered through the peephole. The figure outside was there, framed in dim light, but the features were indistinct. He leaned closer, squinting. His stomach tightened. He tried to convince himself it wasn't real, that maybe it was a neighbor, a mistake, but the shadow waiting there, still and unyielding, suggested otherwise. Another soft shuffle from the street made him flinch, then stillness again. The knock had stopped, replaced by a quiet insistence, a presence he could feel more than see. He swallowed, shaking off the fear, reminding himself he had faced worse nights. His children were asleep upstairs, their safety depended on him. The thought steadied him. Slowly, deliberately, he grasped the door handle, cold metal against warm palms. He took a deep breath, one that felt too loud in the stillness. The door creaked as he opened it an inch, enough to glimpse the figure's face, a familiar shadow, but blurred, hesitant. James's instincts kicked in. He stepped back slightly, his mind racing, heart pounding, yet he forced himself to remain calm. The visitor waited, silently, a presence that demanded acknowledgement without a word spoken. James exhaled slowly. The night was long, but he would endure. James moved carefully through the dimly lit house, each step measured as if the floorboards themselves could betray him. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the living room clock were the only sounds, yet every creak made him flinch. Shadows stretched across the walls like fingers reaching for him. For a moment, there was silence, then a whisper of movement from the kitchen made him tense. He reminded himself the children were asleep, but doubt lingered. Had he locked the door properly, double-checked the windows? His thoughts bounced between responsibility and fear, each one heavier than the last. A flash of light from the street lamp lit the hallway, revealing the coat rack and familiar furniture. Everything should feel normal, safe even. Yet a nagging unease pulsed at the edges of his mind, as if the house itself held its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to disrupt the fragile calm. He inched forward, fingertips brushing the wall for guidance. The cool paint grounding him even as his mind raced. In the kitchen doorway, he paused to notice small details, a mug left on the counter, the kettle humming softly, the faint aroma of leftover tea, and then it came again, a subtle shift of air, barely perceptible but enough to tighten his chest. James froze. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. For a moment, he wondered, had someone entered without his knowledge? He rationalized quickly, just the house settling, the twins shifting in sleep, wind brushing the window, yet the uncertainty clung to him like a shadow. He moved on, inspecting each room systematically, the flashlight cutting through darkness with precise sweeps. Living room, study, guest bedroom, each corner scrutinized. Nothing seemed out of place. Relief mingled with exhaustion, washing over him in uneven waves. The hallway felt endless tonight, shadows elongated, sounds amplified. At the staircase, he paused again, listening intently. Nothing. Too quiet. James exhaled, a long, deliberate release of tension, determined to check the locks one last time, ensure the children were safe. Even as he moved, the house whispered around him. Vigilance would not leave his side tonight. The night was long, but he would endure, step by cautious step through the hallway's lingering echoes. James returned to the living room, every sense alert, as if the shadows themselves could strike without warning. He sank into the couch, careful not to make a sound, and scanned the dim corners with the flashlight he had kept in hand since the night began. His mind replayed Anna's cold text, each word echoing sharply in his thoughts. "I'll send details soon. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." The absence of her signature made it sting more. Who was she really thinking of while sending that message? He shook his head, attempting to focus on the immediate, on the safety of his children. The twins' soft breaths drifted up from the nursery, rhythmic and innocent, a small tether to normalcy in a night that had otherwise become unnervingly distorted. James glanced at the stairway, listening for the familiar creak that never came, wondering if he imagined it earlier. He reminded himself that he had double-checked the locks, secured the doors, yet the feeling of being watched refused to leave. A faint rustle from the hall had him jerking upright, flashlight cutting through darkness, revealing only the familiar furniture and the shadows that seemed to stretch farther than before. He shook his head again, muttering under his breath, "It's just the house, just the wind," but the words felt hollow, inadequate against the gnawing tension that clung to him. Moving toward the study, he noticed the slight tilt of a picture frame, a frame he could have sworn had been perfectly straight an hour ago. He froze, heart pounding. Rational thought told him it was a minor shift, perhaps from settling, yet instinct screamed otherwise. James inched closer, hand hovering near the doorframe, flashlight cutting arcs through the half-light. Nothing moved, nothing except the occasional sway of curtains in the night breeze. He exhaled sharply, tension leaving him in waves, only to tighten again as the sound of a distant thump reached his ears, soft, deliberate, and impossible to locate. He froze. His pulse raced. The children's breathing continued, steady and uninterrupted, yet the sense of intrusion persisted. James gripped the flashlight tighter, moving room by room with painstaking precision, cataloging every small detail. Each shadow became a potential threat, each sound a test of resolve. And yet, amidst the fear, he drew strength from one undeniable truth: he would protect his family, no matter the cost. The night pressed on, unyielding, stretching seconds into eternity. Every step he took echoed softly against walls that seemed to close in. And still, he pressed forward, careful, vigilant, determined. The night was long, but James would endure, through whispers, shadows, and the unseen presence that lingered just beyond the light's edge. James moved toward the kitchen, every step measured, the floorboards beneath him groaning faintly, each creak amplified in the stillness. He paused, flashlight sweeping over counters and cabinets, noting the familiar order that offered some comfort but did little to ease the tension coiling in his chest. The house felt different tonight, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to appear. His thoughts drifted to Anna again, the cold precision of her words replaying like a loop. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Her absence was tangible, a gap that pulled at him with an almost physical weight. He shook his head, forcing focus back to the present, to the soft snores of the twins down the hall and the rhythmic breathing of Liam in his bedroom. Something had changed, though, something subtle, almost imperceptible, a misaligned object, a shadow in the corner, a whisper of movement that vanished before he could identify it. He gritted his teeth, reminding himself that he was imagining things, that the mind played tricks when fear took hold. Yet the instinct remained unshakable. James crouched briefly, inspecting a fallen coaster near the sink, and the rational part of his mind acknowledged the ordinary explanation. Still, doubt lingered, seeping into every corner. He straightened, heart hammering, and turned toward the hall, where silence now seemed louder than any sound could be. A faint thump reached him from the living room, a soft, deliberate pulse that made him freeze mid-step. He strained to listen, ears attuned to even the smallest hint of movement. Flashlight held like a lifeline. The house, in its normalcy, mocked him. Shadows stretched unnaturally across walls, and the night felt almost sentient, aware of his every action. James exhaled slowly, forcing rationality into his thoughts, telling himself that everything was fine, that nothing had changed, that he was merely on edge from the day's earlier events. Yet even as he said it aloud, the words rang hollow, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. He moved on, systematic, inspecting each room in turn, allowing himself no shortcuts, no assumptions. The children's safety anchored him, gave him purpose, but the uncertainty gnawed relentlessly, whispering questions he had no answers for. And then, for a moment, he allowed himself to imagine the worst, a scenario so vivid it sent a shiver down his spine. He shook his head violently, forcing the thought away, but it lingered, a shadow at the edge of his mind. The night stretched on, thick and unyielding, but James pressed forward, step by cautious step, through the corridors that seemed longer than memory dictated. His resolve hardened with every heartbeat, even as doubt whispered in every shadow, every echo, every small, almost imperceptible sound. The night was long, but he would endure, through fear, through uncertainty, through the weight of every shadow that dared challenge him. James paused at the top of the staircase, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip, though he refused to let it show. The hallway stretched before him, dimly lit by the soft glow of the nightlight in the corner, casting long, creeping shapes that seemed to shift with every blink. He could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the occasional drip from the kitchen sink, but beyond that, the house was unnervingly silent. Every nerve in his body screamed that something was wrong, though he couldn't yet name it. His mind replayed the day's events, turning over each interaction, each pause, each casual comment that now felt loaded with hidden meaning. Anna's absence gnawed at him, an invisible pressure that thickened the air. He thought of Liam and the twins, bundled under blankets, their soft breathing steady and comforting, yet it did little to ease the growing unease coiling in his chest. James gritted his teeth and took the first cautious step down the staircase, the wood underfoot creaking softly, a sound that seemed unnaturally amplified, as if the house itself were listening. He told himself he was imagining it, that the shapes were harmless, that the old house simply settled with the night, but the sensation of being watched was insistent, curling along his spine like icy fingers. Step by step, he inspected each room, flashlight sweeping across furniture and walls, cataloging every familiar object, scanning for anomalies. And then, a soft, almost imperceptible click from the living room. James froze, breath caught. The source remained unseen, and every nerve screamed that something had changed. His heart hammered, echoing through his chest, as he crept toward the sound. Flashlight cutting through the darkness. The living room appeared untouched. Chairs were aligned, the coffee table in place, the floor free of any disturbance. Yet the tension lingered, thick as fog. A presence felt rather than seen. James swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus on what was concrete, familiar, visible, but dread clung stubbornly at the edges of his awareness. Every heartbeat was measured, each movement deliberate, instinct guiding him while apprehension gnawed at the corners of his mind. The night stretched on, thick and unyielding, shadows lengthening across the walls, the sense of an unseen observer pressing at his perception, patient and relentless. He knew faltering could endanger his family. That vigilance was his duty, and every careful step mattered. The darkness seemed almost sentient, aware of him, testing his resolve, whispering questions with no answers. James steeled himself, forcing unease to the periphery, pressing forward into the unknown spaces of his home, determined to confront whatever waited silently. The night was long, but he would endure, guided by instinct, by love, and by the certainty that no unseen shadow could stop him. James moved cautiously through the hallway, each step deliberate, ears straining to catch even the faintest whisper of movement. The house seemed alive with soundless unease, walls breathing obscurity, corners harboring imagined figures that fled just as he approached. The soft hum of the furnace mingled with his own heartbeat, steady yet urgent, reminding him of the fragile normalcy he was desperate to protect. He paused at the doorway to the study, flashlight sweeping across bookshelves and scattered papers, each object a silent witness to the night's quiet apprehension. His eyes flicked toward the window, where the reflection of a dim street lamp cast fleeting shapes across the floorboards, merging with his own silhouette, twisting into forms that his mind warned him were only illusions. And yet, a prickling at the nape of his neck told him the house was not empty, not entirely. He forced himself to breathe slowly, grounding each step, cataloging each sound, the distant whir of a ceiling fan, the occasional creak from a floorboard, the muted thud of the twins' breaths from the other side of the house. The air was thick with tension, pressing against him like an unseen hand, demanding vigilance. James advanced into the kitchen, where light from the fridge spilled across polished countertops, revealing nothing unusual. He opened the fridge slowly, the soft click of the door loud in the silence, and paused to listen. Stillness returned, but the pause itself felt loaded, pregnant with potential discovery. A flicker of movement in the living room caught his peripheral vision. He froze, breath shallow, heart racing, then realized the space was empty. His muscles tensed, every nerve alert, instinct guiding him forward. He thought of Liam and the twins again, imagining their soft, even breathing, trusting him to keep the darkness at bay. Each step into the open spaces of the home was a battle against doubt, against the creeping apprehension that threatened to unravel his focus. The night stretched endlessly, shadows merging into a fluid, shifting tapestry, each corner potentially hiding the unknown. James refused to falter. He had learned that unease could be endured, even leveraged, as long as resolve remained intact. His flashlight traced the edges of the room one final time, lingering on objects he had long taken for granted, and he allowed himself a fleeting sense of control, however fragile. Every sound, every dim shape, every heartbeat became a measure of his commitment, to his children, to the house, to the certainty that nothing unseen could outlast his vigilance. The night was long, but he would endure, step by careful step, through the echoes, the darkness, and the quiet insistence to remain watchful and unbroken. James lingered in the hallway, the faint hum of the house around him a deceptive calm that pressed heavily on his nerves. Each room seemed to breathe in tandem with his own heartbeat, carrying echoes of movement that vanished the moment he focused on them. The living room, once warm and inviting in daylight, now stretched before him as a corridor of dim shapes and corners that might conceal more than furniture. He adjusted his flashlight, its beam slicing through the shadows, illuminating details he had never truly noticed, the slight tilt of a picture frame, the curl of a forgotten paper on the floor, the subtle reflection of light on glass. The house had become a theater of anticipation, every creak amplified, every whisper of air a potential signal. He moved deliberately, one step at a time, listening for the subtle shifts that could betray the presence of someone, or something, he could not yet name. His mind wandered briefly to the twins, sleeping soundly in their room, unaware of the tension that cloaked the house. He imagined their breaths, the rise and fall of their chests, and it anchored him. James reminded himself that fear was a tool, a lens to sharpen his focus rather than weaken him. A faint, almost imperceptible click came from the study behind him. He froze, his breath caught in his throat as he trained his flashlight toward the sound, heart hammering with a mix of apprehension and resolve. Nothing moved, but the pause itself seemed loaded with meaning. Slowly, he advanced, allowing the darkness to guide him as much as he guided the light. Each step was deliberate, measured, a negotiation with the quiet that had settled like dust across every surface. The air felt thick with anticipation, pressing against him, daring him to hesitate. He reached the kitchen, the fridge light spilling weakly across the floorboards, revealing only familiar shapes that offered no comfort, only confirmation of his solitude. A fleeting shadow flickered across his peripheral vision, and he instinctively turned, but the space remained empty. He forced himself to breathe, counting each inhale and exhale, grounding his senses in the present. James continued his methodical sweep, flashlight tracing the contours of walls and furniture, alert to the slightest shift in light or sound. He understood that vigilance was both armor and burden, a constant reminder that danger, real or imagined, could emerge at any moment. His thoughts drifted briefly to Anna, to unanswered questions, and he shook them away, unwilling to allow uncertainty to cloud the task at hand. The night pressed on, long and unyielding, yet James pressed forward, step by step, through the hallways, the shadows, the quiet insistence of the house to test his resolve. Every corner was a challenge, every dim shape a question, yet he moved steadily, guided by instinct, by love, and by the certainty that nothing unseen could overpower his determination. The night was long, but he would endure, through the silence, the shifting darkness, and the constant vigilance that had become his companion, unbroken and unwavering. James moved deeper into the house, each step deliberate, senses stretched taut like wire, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the creak of floorboards, even the distant tick of the wall clock felt magnified in the quiet. Shadows stretched along the walls, some cast by furniture, others twisting when he wasn't looking directly. He paused at the top of the staircase. A soft scrape, like nails brushing the banister, made him freeze. His pulse jumped, chest tight. Fear was a lens, not a leash, he told himself, though every instinct screamed danger. The hallway ahead seemed longer, darker, corners unreadable. His flashlight cut through the gloom, but no beam could chase away the feeling of eyes just beyond perception. Thoughts of the twins, asleep down the hall, anchored him. Their soft breaths reminded him what he was protecting. Step by cautious step, he descended, wood groaning underfoot, echoing like a drumbeat. He told himself it was the house, the settling, the wind, but the pressure on his spine said otherwise. Each doorway became a trial. He swept the living room, chairs aligned, coffee table untouched, the rug lying flat, still. The click he had heard earlier throbbed in his chest. His mind catalogued possibilities: animal, settling wood, something unseen. The pulse of dread refused to fade. James swallowed, breathing steady, flashlight slicing shadows, mapping the familiar into the known. But every flicker at the edge of vision teased him, coaxed tension up like smoke curling from a hidden flame. He pressed on, moving to the study, where papers lay scattered as always, nothing out of place. Yet the room felt charged. A faint movement in the corner, a curtain swaying, a shadow shifting, made him spin. Nothing, just darkness, heart pounding. He advanced, step by step. The house became a maze of light and dark, each corner a question mark, each echo a warning. A soft click, another shift, then silence so dense it pressed against his ears. James focused on concrete, the sofa, the rug, the shelves, yet instinct whispered, there is something here. He moved to the kitchen. Light spilled from the fridge onto polished counters. He opened it slowly, the hinge sighing. Nothing, but the pause itself carried weight. Each sound, each shadow, demanded attention. He thought of Anna, of her cold message, her absence shaping the night. A subtle flicker at the far end of the living room drew his gaze. Again, nothing, but still he felt watched. Every nerve bristled. He traced walls, catalogued objects, memorized details, aware that any lapse might cost more than he could imagine. The air seemed alive, breathing with unseen patience, testing resolve, whispering questions without answers. Yet he moved forward, step by careful step, through hallways, across rooms, along the edge of every shadow. He pressed on. Vigilance became both armor and weapon. The night stretched, unyielding, the darkness pressed, unrelenting, and James knew, with quiet certainty, that he would endure, through flickers, through whispers, through the presence that lurked unseen, and that whatever emerged from the shadows, he would meet it head-on, unbroken, unwavering, and ready. James's footsteps echoed softly across the hardwood floors, each tap deliberate, each creak amplified in the silent house. The air seemed charged, as if the walls themselves were listening. He paused near the study, flashlight cutting through the shadows, revealing stacks of books and papers untouched for weeks. A subtle rustle behind him made him spin, but nothing, just the house, breathing quietly. His heartbeat slowed, then surged again, reminding him of the twin responsibilities pressing on his mind: the children, the fractured trust with Anna, the tension threading through the family like thin wire. He stepped forward, flashlight sweeping into the kitchen, where dim light painted the refrigerator's cold rectangle against the wall. Metal scraped softly, brief, precise. He froze, breath shallow, pulse hammering. eyes and ears strained, scanning the room. Nothing moved. Fear hissed at the edges of his mind. He clenched his jaw, grounding himself. Fear could accompany him, but it would not command him. He pressed on, moving through the living room, methodical. Shadows shifted, stretching across familiar furniture. One corner seemed alive, but the outline of the bookshelf remained steady. Still, the sensation of being watched crawled along his spine. Another whisper, softer this time, drifted from the hallway. James froze, heart thumping. Wind, or something else, something nearer. He exhaled slowly, muscles taut, grounding in logic while instinct stayed sharp. Each room became a careful map, light and dark, sound and silence, movement and stillness. In the bathroom, the nightlight flickered, throwing his own reflection in the mirror into shapes that seemed almost human, almost sentient. He blinked, controlled his pulse, and kept moving. Memory and tension filled the house, but he refused to let imagination twist it into terror. He ascended to the staircase, every step calculated, acknowledging shadows without letting them dominate. The children slept above, cocooned in innocence, unaware of the watchful guardian below. A soft click rang from the study. James froze, breath caught, senses flaring. The house waited. He advanced slowly, flashlight cutting arcs through darkness. Each room now pulsed with quiet menace, expectation threading through air, shadows seeming to lean closer. Every movement mattered, every glance could reveal or conceal. Yet he moved, deliberate, measured, alert. The house was a labyrinth of whispering floors, sighing walls, shifting light. Each sound, faint creak, rustle, click, became a guide, a test. Through the living room, the hall, the kitchen, the staircase, he pressed forward. Shadows twisted, merged, and dissolved into shapes of furniture, reflection, and imagination, but his vigilance did not waver. The night was long, the darkness unyielding, and still, James endured, step by careful step, through whispers and shadows, through every unseen corner, holding steady in quiet insistence, unwavering, alert, resolute, a guardian bound by love, duty, and unbreakable resolve. James paused at the threshold of the study, the faint glow of his flashlight illuminating the familiar clutter of papers, books, and framed photographs that told the story of a family once whole, now fractured. Every corner seemed to harbor a secret, every shadow a whisper of movement just beyond the reach of sight. He inhaled slowly, chest tightening with the weight of anticipation, and stepped inside, each footfall measured, careful. The air was cool, carrying a faint scent of old wood and ink. And for a brief moment, he allowed himself a flicker of nostalgia, memories of quiet evenings spent here, reading with the children, Anna laughing softly from the kitchen. Then reality returned with a sting. The feeling of being watched clawed at the edges of his mind, an invisible presence that refused to announce itself yet made its existence undeniable. A faint rustle near the window caught his attention, and James froze. He scanned the room, flashlight tracing the contours of the furniture, the edges of the curtains, the gaps where darkness pooled. Nothing moved, only the shadows shifted, teasing the imagination, testing resolve. His heartbeat thrummed in his ears as he took another step forward, each one deliberate, grounding himself in the rhythm of motion, the tangible certainty of the floor beneath his feet. A soft click echoed from the corner of the room, almost imperceptible, and his breath caught. He lingered, waiting, listening, mind rehearsing every possible scenario, every precautionary measure he might take. The night had grown heavier, each passing minute amplifying tension, yet he refused to succumb. His eyes adjusted, sweeping across the study, landing on a stack of photographs, a reminder of stakes that mattered far more than fear itself. A dim shape flickered in the periphery. An instinct snapped him to attention. James turned sharply. Empty, only the subtle play of light and shadow remained. He forced his pulse to steady, reminding himself that perception could betray the mind under strain. And yet, the sensation persisted, someone, or something, lingering just beyond vision. Testing, waiting, moving slowly, he approached the desk, the flashlight steady, each surface inspected, each shadow accounted for. The air seemed thicker now, charged with an invisible energy, and the weight of responsibility pressed firmly on him. He could not falter. The night was long, and the house seemed determined to challenge him at every step. But he embraced vigilance as armor, resolve as a shield. every sense alert. He navigated the study, confronting the creeping unease with a measured, deliberate courage. The soft sigh of air through the curtains, the subtle shift of darkness in corners, the faint echo of imagined footsteps, all became markers, signposts of endurance. James knew that fear was temporary, but determination was enduring. The night was long, but he would endure, through the dim shapes, the soft whispers, the oppressive quiet, and the lurking presence of the unseen watcher. He would remain the guardian, steadfast, unwavering, aware that no shadow, no flicker of movement, could undo the commitment he held to protect those within the walls he called home. James moved cautiously through the hallway, each step a deliberate negotiation with the darkness that seemed to thicken around him. As if the walls themselves were closing in, the faint glow of the hallway light from the far end flickered, casting long, uncertain shadows that danced across the floorboards. His pulse thrummed in rhythm with the soft creaks beneath his feet, each one a reminder of the house's quiet vigilance, an echo of past movements that seemed to linger long after the occupants had left. He paused near the staircase, gripping the banister, and listened. Silence answered, but not without a weight, a presence that pressed on him, subtle yet insistent. The living room, visible through the open archway, was empty, but the air carried the faint trace of life, a memory of voices and footsteps that had once filled the space. James inhaled deeply, forcing calm, knowing the mind could exaggerate even the smallest sound into a threat. He advanced, the flashlight illuminating the outlines of furniture and photographs, each frame a fragment of a story that refused to stay buried in memory. A faint whisper of movement brushed the edge of his vision, and he spun, empty. Only the dim shapes in corners responded, flickering in quiet defiance. He reminded himself that endurance was more than courage, it was patience, attentiveness, and unwavering focus. Every step forward was measured, each breath controlled. The night stretched on, heavy with expectation, and yet James found rhythm in his vigilance. A silent conversation with the shadows, a negotiation between reality and the mind's imagination. The hallway opened into the study, its door slightly ajar. He pushed it open, and the faint scent of paper and old wood met him, familiar and grounding. Nothing had shifted, yet he could not shake the sense that the space was alive, watching, testing him. He moved inside, eyes scanning, flashlight cutting swaths of clarity through the dense dark. A soft scrape from the corner made him freeze, every nerve taut. He advanced slowly, determined to confront whatever subtle menace lingered unseen. The night was long, but with each deliberate step, he anchored himself, using awareness and resolve as tools against the creeping unease. Shadows continued to stretch and twist, yet James remained unbroken, stepping through the echoes of silence, through the dimly lit rooms, through the invisible pressure that pressed from every angle. He reminded himself of why he endured, of the people counting on him, of the promise he had made to safeguard the household. The faintest sound, a whisper, a shift, a subtle brush of air, alerted him to remain vigilant, but did not deter him. James moved steadily, fully aware, fully present. The night was long, but he would endure, step by careful step, through echoes, through dim shapes, and through the quiet insistence that vigilance must never waver. That fear was a companion, not a master, and that in the end, resolve would outlast every shadow, every hesitation, every silent test. James moved cautiously through the hallway, each step a deliberate negotiation with the darkness that seemed to thicken around him. As if the walls themselves were closing in, the faint glow of the hallway light from the far end flickered, casting long, uncertain shadows that danced across the floorboards. His pulse thrummed in rhythm with the soft creaks beneath his feet, each one a reminder of the house's quiet vigilance, an echo of past movements that seemed to linger long after the occupants had left. He paused near the staircase, gripping the banister, and listened. Silence answered, but not without a weight, a presence that pressed on him, subtle yet insistent. The living room, visible through the open archway, was empty, but the air carried the faint trace of life, a memory of voices and footsteps that had once filled the space. James inhaled deeply, forcing calm, knowing the mind could exaggerate even the smallest sound into a threat. He advanced, the flashlight illuminating the outlines of furniture and photographs, each frame a fragment of a story that refused to stay buried in memory. A faint whisper of movement brushed the edge of his vision, and he spun, empty. Only the dim shapes in corners responded, flickering in quiet defiance. He reminded himself that endurance was more than courage, it was patience, attentiveness, and unwavering focus. Every step forward was measured, each breath controlled. The night stretched on, heavy with expectation, and yet James found rhythm in his vigilance. A silent conversation with the shadows, a negotiation between reality and the mind's imagination. The hallway opened into the study, its door slightly ajar. He pushed it open, and the faint scent of paper and old wood met him, familiar and grounding. Nothing had shifted, yet he could not shake the sense that the space was alive, watching, testing him. He moved inside, eyes scanning, flashlight cutting swaths of clarity through the dense dark. A soft scrape from the corner made him freeze, every nerve taut. He advanced slowly, determined to confront whatever subtle menace lingered unseen. The night was long, but with each deliberate step, he anchored himself, using awareness and resolve as tools against the creeping unease. Shadows continued to stretch and twist, yet James remained unbroken, stepping through the echoes of silence, through the dimly lit rooms, through the invisible pressure that pressed from every angle. He reminded himself of why he endured, of the people counting on him, of the promise he had made to safeguard the household. The faintest sound, a whisper, a shift, a subtle brush of air, alerted him to remain vigilant, but did not deter him. James moved steadily, fully aware, fully present. The night was long, but he would endure, step by careful step, through echoes, through dim shapes, and through the quiet insistence that vigilance must never waver. That fear was a companion, not a master, and that in the end, resolve would outlast every shadow, every hesitation, every silent test. James pressed onward, each step measured, deliberate, as though the very floor beneath him demanded proof of his resolve. The house was alive in its silence, each creak, each subtle shift, amplified in the stillness. Shadows clung to corners, stretching and bending in ways that seemed impossible, yet unmistakably real in the dim light cast by his flashlight. He paused mid-hall, feeling the tension coil around him like a living thing, tugging at his focus, testing the limits of his composure. A faint rustle came from the kitchen. He froze, heartbeat echoing in his ears. He told himself it was only the house settling, a trick of memory or expectation, but doubt crept in anyway. Moving carefully, he advanced, every muscle tuned to detect even the smallest disturbance. The living room appeared empty once more, yet the air hummed with anticipation, as if the space remembered more than it should. A sudden flicker of movement in his peripheral vision made him spin. Nothing, only the dim outline of the armchair, the flickering frame of a photograph, the ghost of motion in the shadows. James inhaled slowly, centering himself, reminding his mind that endurance was the key. Every step was a negotiation with fear, every breath a promise to remain unshaken. He reached the study again, flashlight sweeping the shelves, illuminating titles, objects, fragments of lives lived in quiet, ordinary moments. The room was untouched, yet he could feel it watching, alive with potential for surprise. A soft click from the hallway door made him pause. Every instinct screamed caution, and still he moved, deliberate, unflinching. The night was long, heavy with quiet threats and imagined dangers, yet he pressed forward, guided by resolve and the faint certainty that persistence would outlast apprehension. Each shadow he confronted, each dim corner he passed, was met not with panic but with measured attention, the steady rhythm of a man who had chosen to endure. A whisper of air, a subtle shift of light, reminded him that vigilance must be constant. He moved through the hallway once more, past the echoes of previous footsteps, past the lingering unease that clung to walls and furniture alike. The darkness was thick, oppressive even, but James remained resolute. Every motion, every heartbeat, every breath was part of the pattern of endurance, a deliberate dance with the fear that sought to unsettle him. He reminded himself that shadows could not dictate his actions, that unease was a companion, not a master. The night stretched infinitely, but James continued step by step, through dim corners, through flickering light, through the quiet insistence of the house that he remained watchful. The final stretch to the master bedroom was a gauntlet of perception and nerve, each footfall a testament to patience and resolve. The night was long, but he would endure, step by careful step, through echoes, through darkness, and through the unrelenting whisper of dread that sought to unseat him. In this house of silence, he alone held command, and command meant endurance, vigilance, and the quiet knowledge that every shadow could be faced and overcome. The first hint of light seeped through the curtains, pale and hesitant, brushing against the edges of the room as if testing the world outside. James had moved through the night with careful precision, confronting every creaking floorboard, every dim corner, every flicker of movement that threatened to unsettle him. And now, in this quiet, fragile morning, the tension that had clung to him like a second skin began to loosen. He stood for a moment, flashlight lowered, listening to the faint sounds of life awakening beyond the walls, distant birds, the soft hum of a neighbor's early engine, the subtle stir of a house that had begun to breathe again. The shadows that had once seemed so oppressive now appeared less formidable, the corners less sinister. Still, James did not let his guard down completely. The night had taught him that calm was always temporary, that vigilance must persist even as relief whispered. He moved toward the kitchen, the soft thrum of his heartbeat matching the cautious rhythm of his steps. Each object he passed, each familiar surface, was a reminder of the ordinary life he protected, of the quiet love that had anchored him through hours thick with uncertainty. The twins stirred in their sleep upstairs, their soft murmurs and gentle shifting of blankets audible even through closed doors, a comforting counterpoint to the tense stillness that had dominated the night. James allowed himself a brief smile, a fleeting acknowledgement that endurance had paid its quiet reward. Outside, the sun climbed slowly, spreading warmth across rooftops and trees, illuminating the ordinary world that had continued uninterrupted while he had faced the extraordinary within his own home. He paused at the staircase, glancing back into the rooms he had traversed, aware that the night's shadows still lingered in memory, but powerless against the clarity of morning. The house was quiet now, not threatening, but alive with possibility. James exhaled fully, releasing the weight of tension that had pressed against him relentlessly. In that exhale was a promise, to remain vigilant, to cherish the fragile normalcy, to face every lingering shadow with measured courage. As he reached the living room, sunlight catching the edges of furniture, photographs, and familiar trinkets, he felt a renewed certainty settle within him. He had endured. Every step, every heartbeat, every breath through the night had brought him here, to a fragile equilibrium between fear and courage, darkness and light. And as the house exhaled with him, settling into the rhythm of day, James Caldwell recognized that the true test had never been the shadows themselves, nor the fear they carried, but his own unwavering determination to persist, to protect, and to remain unbroken. The night was behind him, and though vigilance would remain a companion, the dawn was his affirmation. He would endure, he would face whatever came next, and he would emerge, steady and resolute, from the veil of dread that had once threatened to overwhelm him. The morning unfolded gently, a stark contrast to the relentless darkness of the hours before. James stood in the doorway of the living room, sunlight spilling over the floorboards, illuminating the traces of the night, footprints in dust, a chair slightly askew, the lingering echo of moments that had tested him more than he had imagined possible. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the windows, now felt ordinary, almost comforting, and for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, James allowed himself to feel relief without reservation. The children's laughter, drifting faintly from upstairs as the twins woke and Liam stirred, filled the spaces where tension had previously resided, reminding him of the life he protected, of the fragile beauty that made every moment of fear worth enduring. He walked slowly through the house, each step deliberate, noting the ordinary objects that had become symbols of persistence, the coffee mug left on the counter, a forgotten shoe, the framed photographs of family smiles now catching the light. It was in these small, mundane details that he found victory, a quiet triumph that did not require fanfare but resonated with the profound understanding that survival was often measured not by dramatic gestures but by the steady, unwavering commitment to stand through uncertainty. The night had tested every fiber of his being, his courage, his resolve, his capacity to remain unbroken even when shadows seemed to stretch endlessly. And yet, here he was, the first rays of sun painting the walls with warmth, the ordinary rhythm of life asserting itself over the lingering echoes of dread. James exhaled, allowing himself a moment of reflection, a private acknowledgement that the ordeal had transformed him, not through fear, but through resilience. He realized that strength was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. Outside, the world continued in its predictable patterns, unaware of the silent battle that had raged within these walls, unaware of the vigilance and determination that had safeguarded a family's peace. And yet, James did not need acknowledgement. The quiet triumph of enduring the night, of standing firm against unseen threats, was its own reward. The children called from upstairs, their voices filled with curiosity and innocence, and he responded with a steady tone, grounding them, guiding them into the new day. As he prepared breakfast, the sunlight catching the steam rising from a cup of coffee, he understood that the night's shadows would always linger somewhere, whether in memory or in the occasional unexplained creak, but their power had been diminished, rendered ordinary by the enduring force of calm and courage. The quiet triumph was not loud, it was in his presence, in the rhythm of life returning, in the certainty that whatever came next, he would face it with the same careful steps, the same unwavering heart, and the same steadfast resolve that had carried him through the long hours of darkness. The night was over, but the lessons endured, and James Caldwell, standing amid the gentle light of dawn, knew that he had emerged not only unbroken but quietly victorious, a steadfast guardian of his family, his home, and his peace.